Let's talk about the only reason why it might make sense for you, me, or any other filmmaker to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a RED camera. Now, just to be clear, unlike all the other videos on this topic where the filmmaker just yells at you saying you don't need a RED, I want you to know that I love RED cameras, but I am a business owner first and a filmmaker second. Here on this channel, we specifically share information about how to turn your passion into a seriously profitable career and what makes most sense for your business. Sometimes we'll say things that might upset filmmakers who care less about making money and more so about just shooting videos. So if you currently own a RED and you're prepping those fingers to go and unload in the comments, have a field day, my friend. Just know we love RED cameras and see their value, but we're going to be honest about the only reason someone like you should ever buy a RED. So as an entrepreneur considering buying a RED, let's first define what an asset and a liability is. Simply put, liabilities take money out of your pocket, while assets put money in your pocket. If you were to hire an employee that makes more money than what you pay them, they would be an asset to your business. Now, if you were to hire somebody and they make less money than what you pay them, they would be a liability as they're taking money out of your pocket. Now, when we apply this to cameras, obviously the initial purchase takes a lot of money out of your pocket, but will it put more into your pocket over time? Eventually, yes, it absolutely should, but even at that, you have to ask yourself, did I need this camera in order to make this money? Or in other words, could I have accomplished the same things with a less expensive camera? Not to mention, the camera itself depreciates over time, which is another way that cameras themselves can be liabilities. Now, enough of this Business 101 lecture. Let's talk specifically about RED cameras. So the RED Gemini 5K, which is the RED we currently use, will cost you roughly $20,000, and that's just the body. After another $7,000 or so, you'll have everything you need to just turn the camera on and start shooting. Now that price tag is crazy high, but it's also justifiable when you consider what this camera can actually deliver. 5K resolution, a max frame rate of 300 for super smooth slow motion, the ability to shoot raw footage, over 16 stops of dynamic range, 16-bit footage, the list goes on and on. And sure, there are other cameras out there for way less money that can do maybe one or two of these things. But practically any camera out there that has all of these features costs as much or more. So you can see how this price tag starts to make sense when you sum all of these amazing features together. But all of that aside, the real question you need to ask yourself is, do I need these things? Now the answer to that question for almost everyone is no. And now, even though that's the reality, so many filmmakers are constantly battling with themselves over the thought of potentially investing in their business and buying a RED or other high-ticket cinema camera. Unfortunately, so many of us do this from an egotistical perspective. We want the RED camera because it says RED on the side and has that cool skull logo. We want the RED because it will somehow justify our professionalism and prove to others that we're better than them simply because we own a more expensive camera. I know this because it's exactly how I used to think. I'll never forget the first time I saw a RED camera in person. I just immediately thought to myself, I'll do everything in my power to one day purchase this camera. We'll also try to rationalize the decision by saying, well, if I own a RED, I'll get higher paying jobs, which makes it all make sense. Even though we'd all love for this to be the case, it really isn't what happens. Our potential to consistently land high-paying jobs rests so much more on our ability to market ourselves and then close on those opportunities with a finely tuned sales strategy. Sure, having nice footage in our demo reels helps along the way, but that pales in comparison to the other business skill sets I mentioned. Another thing we'll force ourselves not to focus on in the decision-making process are all of the negatives associated with actually using REDs compared to your typical DSLR like the Canon 1DX Mark II. Now, I call these negatives, they're really just sacrifices that any camera will have to make in order to get these amazing features, but let's talk about them nonetheless. For instance, if you're used to using using DSLR or mirrorless cameras, you probably know and love autofocus, like I do. With Reds and a lot of other cinema cameras, you unfortunately have to say goodbye to this. Now, this is a very solvable problem. You can just manually pull focus, or you can get somebody to wirelessly pull focus for you. But this adds expenses and it slows down the production a lot. On top of no autofocus, you'll also have to deal with huge batteries that die pretty dang fast. This can stop a shoot dead in its tracks. For instance, we were recently shooting a mountain biking commercial up in Maine with the Red, and we had to hike up the mountains with all of our camera gear. Because we had limited space, we had limited batteries, and had to be extremely diligent with our shooting process. To make this even worse, the camera takes almost 2 full minutes to actually turn on and be ready to shoot. So you can't really switch it on and off between shots like you would with a mirrorless camera. Now, the way you film mountain biking is to have the bikers ride down a section, you film a quick shot, they then walk back up that section and go down again and again and again. This way you can get the same sequence from multiple different angles. Now, it was really painful watching the Red battery just slowly trickle down to 0 between shots, and we actually only made it about halfway down the mountain before all of our batteries had completely died on us. Another thing you have to keep in mind is not just the size of the Red, because it is heavy, but the amount of gear you need to get anything aside from just handheld shots. Now, the Red is a great handheld camera, but if you want something that's not handheld, you're gonna need a serious rig, which is also gonna be expensive and add even more weight to the setup. When we were filming the mountain biking commercial, we couldn't bring up all the gear in the world, so we had to use the Red either handheld or on a tripod. And it was funny because once the shoot was all done and I was looking at the footage, all of my favorite shots came from the 1DX Mark II mounted on the Ronin S or the DJI Mavic 2 Pro. And this is because we were able to achieve really cool creative movements on those rigs. It made me think to myself, was it even worth the hassle of bringing the Red in the first place? So with all of that being said, when does it actually make sense to buy a Red camera? Obviously, as you can guess, it's gonna have something to do with money and budgets on projects and whatnot, but we can break it down into much more specific terms. So first up, when does it make sense to just rent a Red? And that's a great question because in my eyes, this is what most people should be doing. In fact, it's exactly what we do at Next Level Creators. Although we could go out and buy a Red, we probably never will because it just wouldn't make sense for us. The times we need it are so few and far between, it would just sit there and collect dust in between all of the shoots that we're crushing with our DSLR cameras. But in order to even consider renting a Red camera, you have to approach it through the lens of, how do I fit this expense into my budget? At the very lowest, it costs around $1,200 to rent a Red camera like this for 3 days. Especially when you total up all of the other pieces of equipment you need to make this thing a viable option. Since we're approaching this from a business perspective, we have to consider our profit margins. You could go out and land a $1,200 job and rent the Red, but you would be left with no profit at the end of the day. And maybe that makes sense for a very specific situation you're in, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. Ideally, I would need to have a budget of at least $8,000 or so to make renting a Red the logical choice. This would allow me to get the gear I actually need to get the shots I want, have another person or even a small crew on set to help out. And then finally, it would leave enough money in the budget to actually pocket a decent pay for myself. So that covers renting a Red. What about actually purchasing a Red? That's what this video is about, right? Well, here's my personal opinion on this. In order to buy a Red, you need to have successfully proven it to yourself that you're capable of landing consistent jobs with greater than $8,000 budgets for a full year-long time frame. Take risk out of the equation. Don't buy it hoping that you'll have the jobs to justify the investment. Buy it only when you have a runway of jobs already lined up. Not only that, but do these jobs actually require you to shoot on Red cameras? Is the client specifically requesting it, or is there some other obscure requirement that it must be shot on a Red? If you can answer yes to this and you have the money in the bank, which is another huge key, then purchasing a Red honestly makes sense for you. We've done a ton of jobs where we could have rented the Red, but we didn't because we knew we could make more money, give the client an amazing product, and still get it all done on our DSLR and mirrorless cameras. And in fact, most people won't even be able to tell the difference between a clip shot on a Red versus a clip shot on a solid DSLR like the Canon 1DX Mark II. So pocket the cash and invest in more assets that will grow your business even faster. You can invest in a ton more gear that isn't as expensive, like lighting, additional B cameras, more lenses. Imagine taking that money and hiring a team member, maybe a sales ninja, a marketing manager, a full-time editor, so you can focus on doing what you love, which might be shooting. I mean, you could even put a down payment on a rental property for that much money and get passive income month over month. Either way, the real purpose of this video was to just help those maybe considering buying a Red to look at the bigger picture compared to thinking like I commonly did from an irrational and egotistical perspective. The real truth of the matter is, no piece of gear will ever live up to the unrealistic image you have of it, and it will always be replaced by the next best thing in a matter of years. And not only that, but a skilled filmmaker with a cheap camera will always beat out someone who hasn't developed the skills with more expensive gear because, as I like to say, it's the wizard, not the wand, that produces the magic. So don't focus on the wand you're using, but instead yourself as the wizard. Now, unfortunately, I can't teach you real magic, but for those of you trying to develop your skill set in the fastest way possible, while also not breaking the bank, I'd love to invite you to check out our program, 14-Day Filmmaker. It is literally the world's most affordable film school that can teach you everything you need to know to get out there and turn your passion for filmmaking into a career. Don't ask me though, ask any of our 9,000 students in the program who've fallen in love with this level of training. You get access to over 100 videos, 25 hours of content, and a private supportive community that will help you grow at amazing speeds. Check it out if you're curious. You'll probably be blown away at the price it's currently being sold at. The link is in the description beneath this video. Other than that, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.